From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
Thank you, Chris. Has anyone got a shoehorn? Because I've got about 24 hours worth of stuff we're going to try to fit into this 1 hour of telly. Let's start with the endless attempts from the lefty media to try to bail the Prime Minister out of a nickname that sticks because it's true. Airbus Albo. Now, last night we joked about Toto 1. And as we know, the Prime Minister does like going overseas. But just as passionately, members of the lefty press that want to keep the new car smell around this government, but it's long gone. There's sweet and sour sauce everywhere and quite a few nuggets down the back seat. There's quite a pong. They constantly say that he's not the Mayor of Marrickville and Airbus Albo, it belittles Australia. If you fall for Airbus Albo, then somehow you're an idiot. You've fallen for the misinformation, particularly on this program and this channel at night. So step in the fact checkers today at the ABC to try to bail the Prime Minister out of a nickname. Now, they decided to, they got some new thing, and it's the same group of people that constantly always find in favour of the left. But this one here is about your inoculation against misinformation. They're thinking that there's some sort of a vaccine here, these fact checkers. And they've looked into this one today. How do claims about Airbus Albo and the PM's international travel stack up against other PMs? Put simply, the suggestion is it all a lie? Is it a fantasy made up by the tubby man on TV at night? Well, they've gone to quite the trouble. Have a look at these squiggly graphs and everything. Now, they show you the Prime Ministerships of Morrison, Albanese, Abbott and Turnbull. Now, miraculously, Julia Gillard apparently never existed. Kevin Rudd never happened, let alone John Howard. But no, we're pretending that history started in 2013 with Tony Abbott. Now, as you can see, for obvious reasons, you have a look at that, you glance and you go, oh, Morrison, oh, look at his numbers are higher. Oh, Turnbull, way higher. What about Abbott? Albanese, he's running third in the bunch. The only problem is, if you actually look at this graph and compare all of them to the same number of days that Albo's been in office, it will show you. The Prime Minister has been on 18 trips by this many days in office. Scott Morrison, 17 trips. Tony Abbott, 16 trips. And Malcolm Turnbull, 12. Repeat, no Kevin Rudd, nothing to compare to there. But before you start to say, well, hang on, Paul, maybe this Airbus Albo thing is unfair if, after all, he's only taken one more trip than everyone else. Well, again, this is where the fact checkers have tried to do their best to spin and fashion, put all this claim on a lathe and try and pull it back. What about the number of countries? Well, obviously, Turnbull, bang, you just blink, your eye is drawn to how many he's gone to. Well, they can't really do much about what Morrison did, but basically Abbott and Albo, they're the same, right? They're the same. But of course, remember, all of this is immediately about comparing the current Prime Minister to the former Prime Minister. After 544 days in office, guess what? Albo's been to 30 countries. Scott Morrison's been to 22. Now, yes, 8 is not a huge difference, nor is one more overseas trip. But what were the economic conditions in the first run of these Prime Ministers? The cost of living crisis, all the rest of it here. But the one that you can't muck around with is this. Where very obviously Albo's visited more places than Morrison has. But history apparently only started in 2013, and they tried to squeeze it and push it and turn it this way and that way. So I'm sorry, nice try, fact checkers. Airbus Albo works because he's Airbus Albo. Because he has visited more countries than any other Prime Minister this many days into being Prime Minister. Thanks for giving us the data. Now, on something else that I want to get to here, which is the Queensland government, and often I can talk politically about the Queensland government and their deep frustrations. But tonight, my anger and frustration is tinged with a particular level of heartbreak because, as we have told you for years now, the Labor Queensland government, despite saying that they keep you safe during a pandemic, despite saying they're spending more money on hospitals, despite pretending to be the people who care, the health system in Queensland is terrible. Now, ambulance ramping in particular is a sign of how terrible the system is. Now, the government will try and spin and pretend that, oh, well, there's more people staying in beds for longer who shouldn't be there. And there's people turning up to emergency rooms who shouldn't be there at all. But remember, for most people to get into the back of an ambulance, it has to be relatively serious. But for thousands of hours, ambulances just sit at hospitals because there's no room for the patients in the back of the ambulance. In regional areas, as we've told you before, if you call an ambulance, if it turns up and you need to be taken care of by the paramedic in the back of the ambulance, well, you may as well have, and you better hope there's a mate around because there's only one person in that ambulance and you may have to have a mate to drive it. Now, in the past couple of years, since the last state election, about 20 to 30 people have died as a result of not being able to get into a hospital, not being able to get into the back of an ambulance because of the delays around the ambulance system. Now, previously, when it was 20 people towards the end of last year, the Health Minister got the heave-ho, swapped with the Attorney General. The Attorney General is now the Health Minister, the former Health Minister is now the Attorney General. The expectation is that Sharon Fentiman is the same type of person who can spin for Australia, and she may well end up being the next Premier of Queensland. But as a Health Minister, she is appalling. And in the past couple of days, there have been two stories about people who have died because of the way the Queensland government have run the health system every day since they were returned to office, the best part of 10 years ago. The AMA. Now, they were on the side of the Queensland government when it was about lockdowns and lockouts and borders, but they are saying that the ambulance ramping is getting worse. A couple of days ago, we got news that a grandfather died because he, again, was waiting for an ambulance. And there's the story of this woman from Logan, 51 years of age. She should have been in the back of the ambulance within 15 minutes, but alas, she died because it didn't turn up.
Last night, 9 News revealed Kath was suffering chest pains when she called an ambulance from her Forest Lake home at 10:30 p.m. The ambulance was dispatched as what's known as a Category 1, meaning the most serious. It was supposed to be under lights and sirens to arrive in 15 minutes, but it didn't turn up. Kath suffered a heart attack through the night. Her son discovered her body the next morning.
She had chest pains. It should have been there in 15 minutes. When it wasn't there like 90 minutes later, the son called and cancelled it. She says, look, I'm just going to go to bed. She goes to bed, she has a heart attack, and the next day, her son finds her dead. That's the reality of the health system that is being run by this health minister, the former health minister, and this premier who's been the boss the whole way through. Now, the health minister, realising that this was a story that was starting to get out of control, as they call it in the PR business, she went on a current affair last night. This, in part, was the excuse as to why Kath is now dead.
It was one of the busiest nights for our hardworking paramedics, and at the call centre they had to prioritise a lot of Code 1 calls, but that doesn't change the fact that there should have been an ambulance there much quicker.
Now, after seeing that spin response, does this look like a person who truly understands the gravity of what has happened here, or this is somebody trying to find the right form of words to make a story go away? Here she was pretending that she'd been rocked to the core by the failures of her own system. I don't believe a word she's saying here.
Yeah, Ali, firstly, I want to say that what's happened here with Kath is absolutely devastating. I'm devastated. Personally, I'm devastated for her family, particularly her son.
Seriously, she has the warmth of somebody that you're ordering a pizza from. Like, if it was this serious to her, it would look more urgent. She would look more rattled. But the reality is that this has happened too many times. Now, Kath's sister was on a current affair tonight. Alison Langdon, of course, was moved to tears when she was presenting this conversation, because the reality is that not only has this woman lost her sister, but Kath's son has now lost his mother and his father, and he's just finished school.
He's gone from the highest of highs to the lowest of lows in the space of 24 hours. You know, on Friday morning, we're at school celebrating his graduation from high school, and literally 24 hours later, he's finding his mother, you know, deceased unnecessarily. So he's numb, he's angry, and he's got a really long road ahead of him.
That poor kid. Now, when eventually this message will make it to him, he did nothing wrong. His mum said she wanted to go to bed and they had been waiting too long anyway. But as Kath's sister goes on to explain, despite the fact that this story has been shown on the news, has been mentioned on the breakfast shows, has been mentioned twice now by A Current Affair, how's this for a kicker? The Premier of Queensland has had nothing to say to the family, and wait till you find out where Kath used to live.
Kath lived in the Premier's electorate. Have you heard from Anastasia Palaszczuk?
Nope, no, not a thing. And that just speaks volumes in itself.
Now, during the last election, I had great fun in talking about how the stain of this government needed to be removed with disinfectant. But of course, they were able to spin and BS their way to another few years in power off the back of COVID. But it's not just the criticism that we will offer here or what you'll hear on the radio or what you'll read in the paper. If you're watching us in Queensland tonight, you need to convince your fellow Queenslander. Because the reality is that this is a fixable system. The reality of the country that we live in right now is that it always grows in terms of population, and that means there will always be more stress on our health system. But the Queensland government has got plenty of money to spend on things that are not life and death. You know, like the money they put into the film business so the Premier can turn up with red carpet events, or the billions of dollars that they're going to spend on the 2032 Olympic Games. But what does it say about a government that when it has a choice of knocking down the Gabba or saving people like Kath's life, they pick the Gabba every time? This government will try to change the subject, will try to pretend that every other option apart from them on the ballot paper is evil and Queensland will lose its reputation, blah, blah. Here's the reality. The hospital system is bad because the government is bad and has been bad for as long as it has been there. The chances of you or your family member getting sick, getting picked up by 000, getting put in the back of the ambulance and making it into the hospital gets worse every month. Unless you change the government, that will never get better. Because the lesson that politicians learn is that there are issues that will tip them out of office. And if politicians learn that people can die as a result of their failures as the government, yet they get re-elected, then the people's deaths don't matter to the government. Perfect example. In Victoria before the last election, regardless of everything else, the biggest reason that they needed a change of government there was because 33 people died because the 000 system didn't work. Yet the government wasn't just re-elected, it got a bigger majority. You see, here's the reality. When Kath woke up on Friday, she was going to her son's graduation. She didn't wake up on Saturday. Think of what you're doing this Friday and what your plan for Saturday is. Because while we all hope that we are not going to be the person who doesn't wake up on Saturday, there is no reason we may not either. And if you have a system that is as bad as the one that has been consistently seen in Queensland and the people in charge of it just get to BS their way out of it, then nothing changes. So yes, I'll go off like a Catherine wheel and I'll have fun at their expense, but this is as serious as it gets. If you are watching us in Queensland, please convince your fellow Queenslanders to get rid of this mob. They don't know what they're doing. They don't care. Meantime, to Canberra, where let's talk about national security here, where the reality is that many people thought that Christina Keneally would be the person who would replace Peter Dutton as the Home Affairs Minister. Remember, that was the expectation. She would win the seat of Fowler. She would become the next Home Affairs Minister. Obviously, our dear friend Di Lee put a small spanner in those works. So Anthony Albanese had to quickly shop around for whom he would end up putting into this national security portfolio of Home Affairs. It has in its responsibility ASIO, the AFP and Border Force. It's one of the most senior and serious positions in the government. He picked Claire O'Neill. Now, Claire O'Neill is supposedly from the right faction of the party and she's from Victoria and she's kind of cool like Richard Marles, but the reality is none of that matters because she's just not up to it. She's one of these people who's very good at posing, and she was able to pose all the way through the election campaign as the face, strong female face of the future of Australian politics. And she was there to wave and waggle her finger around when the data leak happened in Optus earlier this year. And she did her bit following the overall government strategy that when all else fails, blame Dutton, by asking Christine Nixon, the former Victorian Police Commissioner, to have a quick review into Australia's visa system, of which the main conclusion was Peter Dutton bad, Peter Dutton bad, Peter Dutton bad.
The responsibility for a lot of these problems falls directly at Peter Dutton's feet. Peter Dutton is the person who oversaw the immigration system and its decline. I see this as one of the great frauds in Australian politics. Peter Dutton made a career out of pretending to be a tough guy on the borders. Anyone seriously arguing that immigration compliance was a focus of Peter Dutton?
But of course, the fraud that has been exposed as knowing what they are doing in this serious portfolio is clueless Claire O'Neill. When the High Court made its decision to remove people from permanent detention, including people who were rapists, drug smugglers, and even a man, doesn't qualify for the word, but a man who punched his infant daughter are among those that are now out amongst us. This idiot minister, clueless Claire O'Neill, said, oh, we couldn't possibly pass a law to do anything, sorry, they're out now, that's just the way it is.
The idea that it is open to the Australian government to simply legislate away a High Court decision is not how our Constitution works.
And then only to turn around and say, well, we are going to legislate and we're legislating so awesomely that this is take it or leave it.
We've got a very clear message for the opposition today. Peter Dutton loves to talk about what a tough guy he is on our borders. But the truth is, words don't make Australia safe, tough laws do. The opposition has a chance today to help the government make Australia a safer country. They need to come into the parliament and help us pass this law.
But as Peter Crillon pointed out, at the time and again this evening, there were so many holes inside that legislation, it was the opposition that turned around and tried to plug as many of them as possible, including that none of those people should be able to go anywhere near kids. And where we can, let's whack an ankle bracelet on these people so we know where they are. But of course, one thing that was consistently being said by clueless Claire O'Neill, again, a perfect example of somebody that just has no idea what they're doing. Because, you see, they practiced a sort of preening politics. They practiced an identity politics way of doing the game. Oh, she's got a strong eye roll game, but her eye is off the ball when it comes to national security. Because she said this as many times as she possibly can, thinking the Australian public are stupid.
There is one single focus and one single priority that we are using to manage the implications of the High Court's decision, and that is the community safety of the Australian citizens who elect us to this parliament.
But then when asked today, how many of these people are currently wearing bracelets so we know where they are, what do you reckon was the response of clueless Claire O'Neill?
So the ankle bracelets and the curfews are being rolled out at the moment, Carl. But can I just say, just so your viewers are really, really clear on this, if it were up to me, none of these people would have been released from detention.
There's a difference between being rolled out and the ankle bracelets are on, though. Are they on?
So I'll let Minister Giles speak to that. I certainly know that many people have had those curfews and ankle monitoring bracelets rolled out.
Is there no group chat? Is there no email conversation that, say, every 2 hours is being sent between the people running this so everyone's across it? The reality was she's not across it, but she keeps being sent out on television because someone somewhere in the government thinks she's a good performer. And good performer normally means just remember the talking point, then pivot to Peter Dutton bad. But the reality is that she has a responsibility and she can't answer the detail of the things that she has responsibility for. And you've seen this time and time again, that she's great at the talking point, but when the talking point doesn't fit, she looks like a moron. She looks like someone who is clueless. Now, I have no doubt that there's about to be a collection of pitchforks sent my way for sexist comments about female politicians. No, this is just a clueless politician. This is a politician who is out of their depth in a government that has no idea what it's doing other than to keep running the 2022 election over and over and over again. And on the ankle bracelets, interesting piece in the Sydney Morning Herald today about why this is not as safe as you think it is. Because in just one of the states, the one where most of the people are right now, in New South Wales, the state government only keeps track of ankle monitorers for people who are either parole or high-risk offender release orders. Monitoring is handled by a dedicated unit inside the New South Wales Corrective Services because it is such an extensive and expensive work. Corrective Services confirmed to the Herald that they would supply the equipment to Border Force. So then the conversation is it Border Force or a private company that will now monitor where these people are? Because you see, private companies operate ankle monitors for people on bail in New South Wales. They've farmed this out to the private sector. If you thought it was someone's job to be a police officer or a corrections officer sitting in front of a screen watching whether the person who has been convicted of a horrible crime is moving from this suburb to that suburb, no, it's a private company. However, law enforcement agencies are highly critical, saying private monitors do not protect the community and should not be used. The Australian Border Force did not respond to questions about whether private companies were being considered to monitor detainees. You reckon Claire O'Neill's got a clue whether the ankle bracelets are being monitored by a private company or just handed out by the local state police? Now, one thing you can bet the house on is that whatever she tells you in the morning will be 100% the opposite of what it is by the afternoon. Because you see, the talking points that she does on breakfast TV or Radio National interviews crumble by the time reality sets in. Oh, and by the way, despite the fact that today she was out and about there, sent out for, again, the good performer media to clap her on, nothing about hate preachers. Remember, as we speak right now, hate preachers posting videos of awful things that they're saying about Jews in Australia. Not a word from the minister who has more to say about Optus data leaks, Donald Trump Jr., than any of this stuff. She is out of her depth. She is clueless. She should go, but if you start with her, there won't be many left in the cabinet of a useless government that may well be okay-ish at politics, but they're very bad at government right now. Perfect example, the world of cost of living. As we know, petrol through the roof has been for a while. When it comes to inflation, in October, petrol's up 19.7%. Oh, but inflation's only 5 and a bit percent. Yeah, that's the point. It's almost 4 times higher than the rest of the economy on inflation. Oh, and that's, by the way, from numbers before anything happened in the Middle East, so you can forget that smart-ass excuse. In September, it was up 13.9%. Today, the average petrol price, $1.92 in Sydney, $2 in Melbourne, $2.14 in Brisbane. And we now get some research which was spun oh so beautifully by The Guardian today and the Climate Council saying that a whole collection of Australians aren't driving as much as they used to. Now, obviously, the Climate Council says that's fantastic because we save the planet. But guess what? It shows us that the cost of petrol is meaning people aren't using their car, which means they are having greater difficulties getting around. 71% of people have effectively changed their driving habits. 56% are trying to drive less each and every day. 54% of those surveyed believed that the standard will save them money overall. You see, people want to save money, and the government has the capacity to save 25 cents a litre, every tank, every servo, every pump in the country. They can do it for 6 months. It'll cost $3 billion. Gina Rinehart has said something similar in an interview that she gave to James Morrow this afternoon in the Daily Telegraph. It could happen from the 1st of December, and then, if you must, put it back to the usual after Christmas, but the longer after Christmas, the better. It's an easy way to help families and the elderly for Christmas and the school holidays. No one is asking for a handout. We just need the government to take less money from Australians. Hallelujah. And one last thing here I want to talk about, which is the Prime Minister and some speeches that have happened in the past couple of days. I've got a million notes and 100 things I want to talk about, but I want to finish on this one before we get to Joe Hildebrand and Bronwyn Bishop. Now, today, the Prime Minister was at the reopening of a Holocaust museum in Melbourne. Peter Dutton was also there. Now, Albo mouthed the right words, flapped his gums in the right direction, but there was one line in particular that just was ludicrous that he even had the balls to say. Have a look at this.
As the conflict continues, anti-Semitism is on the rise, but we will not let it find as much as a foothold here. Australia will always denounce it and reject it utterly.
A foothold. We will not let it get a foothold in. Well, I hate to break this to you, Prime Minister, and if you had a Home Affairs Minister who was across it, she'd be able to tell you, and I know that you don't see much from the plane window because of that many thousand feet, you're not able to see what's happening in your own country. As always, before we show you this stuff, warning, distressing footage. You want to talk about whether it's going to get a foothold in the country or not? Well, Prime Minister, it already has. We won't let it get a foothold in. Again, these people, I repeat it every night, do not look at what they say, look at what is happening. Look at what they are doing. Look at what they are not doing. Look at what they prioritise. How dare he stand in front of that community and say, we won't let it get a foothold? The front of the Opera House, on websites all over the country, in Islamic community centres all over Western Sydney in particular, out the front of a Jewish community in Melbourne. And we haven't even included the ones that got the police escort marching through the streets of Sydney or driving from the western suburbs of Sydney to the eastern suburbs of Sydney. Take a foothold. It's here, pal, and you're doing 4/5 of bugger all about it. Because you, like the rest of your government, are constantly running the last election campaign forever, thinking that if you keep mentioning the previous government, you will constantly stay in power. Well, it might work for one more term, but I guarantee you, when this thing ends, it's going to end very, very badly for people who refuse to deal with Australia as it is, as opposed to the Australia that they are pretending it is. More in a sec. Bronwyn Bishop, Joe Hildebrand, we're just getting started. I'm telling you, a lot of notes and lots of things to talk about tonight. Well, if you want to work out who's going to have the easiest kick towards the wind, or the one who's got a gale blowing against which way they're kicking, Joe Hildebrand's got some work to do tonight. Bronwyn Bishop will be the one who'll be dunking all over him. I apologise.
What a lovely couple of weeks it's been. It's just win after win after win after win, hasn't it?
Look, brother, I felt your feeling. I've been where you've been. I've had to find the positive when there was sometimes positive not there. So let's talk. I want to race through a few things here because we're with you guys for the rest of the show, so plenty of time to fire up. Why won't they cut petrol tax? Gina Rinehart's come out and agreed with where we've been for months, which is they've got the money, they could do something about it, it's extra, and it's not inflationary. It could be done, it should have been done by now, so why the hell aren't they doing it?
You know, there's a fundamental error that people can fall into in politics. It's when you believe your own handouts. And that's what you've got with the Treasurer. He believes in his own omnipotence.
Yeah, good point.
Now, honestly, to cut the petrol excise, as you've been banging on with for ages, now Gina's come in and you're on the same tram. The basic
Happy to be
thing
there.
is, absolutely, but the thing is this, if you do cut the excise, petrol is one of the things that's in the basket.
Correct.
That's counted when you're looking at the CPI. It's a factor that feeds into the cost of fruit and veggies because everything has to be transported.
Yep.
With one stroke, you could have lowered that inflationary pressure, and just maybe the Reserve Bank need not have put up interest rates on Melbourne Cup Day.
And look, if you drive a manual car, we're talking about the difference between 10,000 revs and 9,000 revs, but anything that takes it a little bit off is the point.
That's the point. And the other point is this. They say, oh, well, you know, we've got to have this there because it's for roads. It is not hypothecated. It can be spent on anything.
Yeah.
Second, and the other thing about it that's important is that, of course, it's a ratcheted tax because as the price of petrol goes up, so does the GST.
Yeah.
And so that also is counted in the CPI.
Correct. Well, this is the thing. Yeah. So these people
at
all
every
claim to
turn,
be. Yeah.
There's a reason. The answer to your question, though, why? Because they believe their own. I was going to say a nasty word.
Stuff.
Their own stuff.
Yes. Well, because this is the thing, right? So and you see this all the time in question. Oh, $26 billion worth of cost of living relief. That all sound. That's a very big. I get it. Don't get me wrong. $26 billion is a very big number, right? However, it sounds bigger and more impressive in the parliament than when eventually it's divided down amongst the thousands of people that it starts to head towards. And then, remember when, I think it was one of the Howard governments, remember they turned around and there was a very small tax cut and it was referred to as the milkshake tax cut because eventually divided by everyone, divide by the number of weeks. So
that was Amanda Vanstone's
correct.
special.
You can back yourself in as much as you want about 26 billion. The reality on the ground is not there. Can we go back and play the Prime Minister from his speech at the synagogue in Melbourne? Because, Joe, I know like me, sometimes this issue just confounds, right? Yep. Prime Minister today does exactly what he should do, right? Which is to go to a place of faith, to look to people who are currently being attacked, look them in the eye, say, we feel your pain, we stand with you, right? And he said this.
As the conflict continues, anti-Semitism is on the rise, but we will not let it find as much as a foothold here. Australia will always denounce it and reject it utterly.
But the reality, Joe, is that it does have a foothold here. And we showed all of the stuff before. Tomorrow, a bunch of kids are going to take to the streets for Palestine. For obvious reasons, that's not an act of anti-Semitism, but some of the people who are pushing it and behind it, like, well done to the Herald again today, they were able to expose that it's university students from the Socialist Alliance that are behind and the revving up of and organising of these protests. And there's one hell of an anti-Jew strain that can go through the far left in our universities.
Yeah, and it is a real problem. It's been a real problem for the hard left generally and the left of the Labor Party and also, you know, other Labor parties throughout the world. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn's Labor Party in the UK was particularly disgraceful and it's got to be stamped out. It should have no place in it. And I think when Albo was saying, you know, anti-Semitism has no place here or cannot be allowed to grab a foothold here, obviously it's out there. We've seen it out there on our TV screens, the horrible, disgusting, obnoxious, hateful, murderous things that have been screamed from literally our greatest national landmark. But what he's saying is that it should have no place in decent, civilised society.
And it doesn't. But isn't this the opportunity? And I'm not ripping into you, I'm trying to give you the opportunity, right? The opportunity for him today was to build on speeches from the week before, the week before, the week before, the week before, but none of them have existed, to turn around and say, it will not get a foothold here. That's why X number of people have now been sent to have a look at radical preachers. That's why we've booted this person out of the country, that person out of the country. That's why the E-Safety Commissioner has pulled down the websites of ding, ding, ding. But because none of that's happened, he can't just turn around and say, well, in polite society, none of this stuff happens. Well, in impolite society, every day it's happening.
And look, I think if you look at what New South Wales Premier Chris Minns is doing, and again, the contrast, I think, is their political backgrounds. You have Albo as a man of the left, although he's behaved admirably as a man of the Labor right, and his decision-making has been consistent with that. But I think think a lot of it, because sort of, I suppose, culturally, he's come from that background where pro-Palestine, anti-Israel politics is so hardwired into it. I actually see him a lot as someone who's actually sort of coming into light and actually making what he would consider to be a strong stand.
Bronwyn, you're holding back here. What's going on? She wants to...
But Albo has people on the left criticising him for being too pro-Israel.
It's in the DNA of socialists. This stuff for these kids tomorrow is coming out of the socialist alternative. If you go back to Marx in his essay he wrote on the Jewish question in 1844, what did he say? He said,
I know very well.
The final analysis, the emancipation of the Jews is the emancipation of mankind from Judaism. He's about as anti-Semitic as they come.
Although he was also half
And then,
Jewish.
of course, your good friend, or somebody's good friend, not yours, Corbyn, who was trounced out of the Labor Party in Britain for his anti-Semitism, he actually turned up at a ceremony for the murder of the Jewish athletes in Munich to lay a wreath.
Wow.
First of all, he denied being there, and then when he got caught out, he remembered, and many people remembered, that the Meinhof, the Baader Meinhof gang, who of course praised this as happening. What did they say? They viewed hatred of the Jews as hatred of capitalism, and hence the murders were justified.
But I hate socialists too. I hate these people too. So if there was a pogrom, I'd be rounded up because I look that Jewish. People think I'm Jewish. White supremacist thing.
It is full of them. And that
not the
sort
same.
of
The
statement
socialist
that the Prime
alternative at
Minister
university
made,
has nothing to do with the Labor Party. They're that far.
The Prime Minister made today. Just shows how out of touch he is.
But he's doing the right thing and saying the right thing.
Okay, but does it not overlap with the failures, like I listed before, about people like Claire O'Neill and basic knowledge about things like how many ankle bracelets and who's actually monitoring, right? Which is that, okay, yes, are they ticking the box at the very, 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 very top of the form? But the reality is that the detail is on the next page, the next page, the next page, and it ain't there. Now, again, I keep being told, oh, Claire O'Neill, mate, she's one of the good ones. You shouldn't be hooking into her. Well, literally, she turns around and says, here's the legislation. We can't legislate. Oh, now, here's the legislation. Take it or leave it. Then it gets amended. She told me over and over again. I'm not going to read the editorial. But
I think the lesson here is that first-term governments are always wobbly. They always make mistakes. That is absolutely true. It was true of Kevin Rudd. It was true of Julia Gillard. It was true of Tony Abbott. It was true of Malcolm Turnbull. It was true of Scott Morrison. And it's true of this lot. That's why we've had a leadership coup in every single first term until the last one. And so...
What we're seeing here, I did not think I would ever see in my country. I didn't think I would ever see it.
The release of the detainees?
When I see a mass mob on the Opera House of our saying...
I'm talking about Claire O'Neill, but yeah.
So this is not comparable to any other...
No, we're not talking about that. We're talking about Claire O'Neill and the snafu with the immigration detainees.
The question of the job she's got is a very complicated job. It's a very big job. And all she's been able to say is, oh, Peter Dutton's really bad. Oh, and I think I'll investigate him. Who does she pick? She picks the person who was the...
Christine Nixon, who, of course,
went to dinner when the dreadful fires broke out in Victoria. Yeah. Of course she picked Christine Nixon.
Kelly Bayer Roseman, so, you know, could have been
yes, it could have got worse. Yes, it could have got worse.
Again, look, it's obviously not good. I'm not pretending that this has been good, and I've written about it this week. But first,
Joe, and you're always putting a rosy glow on what is. you try and put lipstick on the pig. You really do.
All right.
And you can't go on doing it all the time.
It's a very nice lipstick.
All right, thank you. All right, now we're going to take a quick break. Back with more, plenty more to talk about, fire up about, including. Some extra visas being given to people coming back from Gaza, but we'll move on. There's lots of other things to get to this evening with a pretty interesting group. I'm telling you, 3 days worth of shows. Let's try and do it in, 18 minutes. Good luck, but here we go. Shout out to Ali, love you. Glad that you're watching, along with the rest of the family. All right, now, if you'd like to send us an email, paul@skynews.com.au. There is lots to discuss here with Bronwyn Bishop and with Joe Hildebrand. We will move away from Middle Eastern things only because I think we're in the 98th hour of the same conversation just today alone, right? But Government confirmed today that there's going to be hundreds of people which are going to be coming from Gaza to be given visas to Australia. Now, it makes very obvious sense why these visas are put in place, where we have taken people from war zones before at a serious number and moved through. Certainly, my colleagues, including Sherry Markson, have spoken a lot about the need for security detail, double-checking of things. Knowing the system as you do, that happens, doesn't it, to any and everyone who comes into the country under things like this, or you giggle for what reason?
Because I look at the record of people who've gone through the system over the years who never have got in.
Yeah, fair point.
And you can bet there'll be some who will come in who should not. But what really aggravated me was Penny Wong coming out and saying, oh, it's all okay because I gave 1,700 to Israelis. Really? Have you seen them rioting and threatening to kill? No. I mean,
we don't know that these people are
rhetoric.
the same people who have threatened to kill. I think this is a no-brainer. Again, same as you, we accept people from war zones whose lives are in danger, regardless of which side they're on.
But there is need on this.
Of course, they have to be screened. Yeah.
Well,
what's going to be interesting again? This is the detail stuff, right? Where they just won't. They'll tell us national security. For the most obvious of reasons. We literally know right now that if you're in Gaza, you can't get out of Gaza unless you can get out the gate at the very bottom of it, of which you have to prove some connection or have an Australian passport. Yep. These are people who don't have an Australian passport.
But they do have connections.
Correct. So they've got some connection, right? So they're going through a funnel. But then where do they go, right? Because the checking is not happening at the gate, right? Obviously. So there has to be some level of something that's happening in a third country before we get back here. And I would like to hear a bit more about that.
They would have these people's names, their backgrounds. They would have. They wouldn't be physically checking them, presumably, but they would know enough about them.
But I'm just saying, there's nothing wrong with the government coming out and saying, we need to believe this is the right thing to do. Now let me tell everyone the process that we've gone through here. But they don't do that.
No, they don't.
Instead, they turn around and say, don't worry about that number because this number balances it out.
Exactly.
No, you don't need to know anything, you're too stupid. Really? Are you?
And the statement that some had they didn't say tangential, but that's what they meant, connection to Australia. In other words, they weren't necessarily
husband,
family,
wife, son, daughter, brother.
It could be anything.
But again, we take humanitarian people with no connection to Australia whatsoever.
Correct.
The important thing is that they're screened at the country of origin. A lot of them are still there, possibly most, as far as I know. Well, and so that is what you want. It is what you want to be doing it this way and making sure the humanitarian program goes to those most in need, instead of someone rocking up in a fishing boat and saying.
And my issue is that any person here on a visa, there has to be a trigger in it that if they do something wrong in the country, straight away. But can you imagine a scenario where we can't send you back there because, and away we go.
Starts the High Court.
Yeah, correct.
They can say all they like that they have done all the checking, but their track record is that they don't do their homework, they haven't done the background work, so they will assume that they haven't done it here either.
Correct. All right, now a couple of other ones before we get going here. Movember is happening as we speak, and of course Nicholas Reese's upper lip is looking the better for it. Please support him, regardless of whether you agree or disagree.
Recognise him.
Yeah, I know. Look at him; he's just looking so stylish. He used to they used to say, "Yeah, look like a porn star." The thing is that it's like he's now starting to look like one from a previous era, right? Like not a real current era.
It looks like a 70s porn star in real time.
Yeah, correct.
It's part of his transition. Don't knock it. I told you he's a good guy. He'll one day get over his socialism and be okay.
But of course, one of the great things about Movember is it is about raising money awareness about men's health, right? Now, Joe, you can pick any indice anywhere about how blokes go with their health, but particularly blokes with mental health and how they don't talk about it. We do not have enough of a conversation about this. Every now and then there's a day, a month, a theme. Yeah. But, amongst blokes, very rarely do we get into proper conversations.
Yeah, and it is a real problem. It's a real barrier. We know that blokes hate going to see the doctor because they hate admitting anything's wrong. They hate talking to other blokes about things that they think might make them look weak or might make them seem not as tough. We like to laugh about things and joke about things instead, brush things aside. I've been at that many. I mean, I'm a charity whore. Let's face it, because I love the work.
Especially if there's a red carpet.
But no red carpet. No red carpet for me, tragically. But I was at a food bank thing this morning with Robbo and Chris Minns was there as well, and we had someone who was actually who ran a thing called Survivors R Us, which is for DV victims, but they've brought it out and all sorts of other stuff. And the toughest thing and I hear this from Salvo's, Vinny's, Food Bank, everyone, the toughest thing is to actually get people to ask for help.
Correct.
People, especially in the country.
Literally, we had this conversation
really
Turbans for Australia,
yeah.
where those blokes were saying the first step is one of the hardest. And look, all I say is what we said last night about the talking to kids and take the first step. As fearful as it may well seem, it could be the best step you ever take in your life, okay? And your role as a bloke is to have at least one friend who you legit tomorrow will check in on. And by that, I don't just mean, g'day, mate, how are you? It's like, no, mate, how are you? And actually, if there's a pause, keep talking, because there's a good chat to be had there, I promise it. I promise you. I have to talk about the middle class because apparently, I don't say with derision, I say of familiarity, but of course Jennifer Westacott used to be with the Business Council. She's out and about talking about how the middle class is being pulled away at the moment by current economic circumstances. Is this the same person who cheered in when she was in the Business Council job, the environmental policies that were going to push up power rates, all the rest of it, because that was the difference from her previous position of the same policies under Shorten were an economic wrecking ball? Is she just finding arguments to swing to here?
Well, let's look at the reality of what is happening to the middle class. It is being squeezed mercilessly. And if you look at the way jobs have been created in this country, you've got many more who are in what you call number one group jobs, more and more of them coming out with university degrees. And you've got at the other end, you've got a lot of people who've got no skills or very little skills, who are coming largely, a lot of migrants come in that category. The number of people who come into that middle area that used to go into manufacturing and be skilled tradespeople has shrunk enormously. And its growth factor compared to the other two is minuscule. And these are the people who really hurt when the Reserve Bank puts up interest rates. It really, really hurts because they're the people who are stretching themselves to give their kids what they see, they want and are aspirational for.
100%.
And they're the people who hurt the most. Whereas in the other groups, this A group, they'll get by quite nicely, thank you very much. And this one here, they'll be into the gig economy, they'll do all sorts of things. But that middle group that was a believer in all the things that Australia stands for, that we are a good country, that hard work does pay off, that if you apply yourself and live well, you'll be successful in your country, and that you can rely on government to set good policies that will allow you to be successful.
Well, because it's this thing
and
where
you can't do that anymore.
No, I'm with you. But it's this thing, Joe, where again, when we talk a lot about housing policy, all the rest of it, right?
Yeah.
Every government for the past 10 years had a very clear one about first home buyers, right? And then there's lots of people with a conversation about downsizing. But then there is this group in the middle that a lot of people are in, which of course is when you've moved out of your one-bedroom unit and you try to buy the three-bedroom house or the four-bedroom house because that's the kids with. Those are the people who are absolutely under the pump right now. They're the ones that aren't part of the $26 billion cost of living relief, this, that and the other. And I think that so often media and government forget those people.
Oh, yeah, and again, look, the number of stories I could tell you, just anecdotal stories, but that really strikes home. One was, and this was again this morning, where a food bank worker went to a house. It was a brand new flash kind of housing estate in Western Sydney, brand new build. They'd obviously bought it with, the low interest rates that everyone said, Philip Lowe said, we're never going to go up again, blah, 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 whatever, asterisk. And it was a landscaper that actually reported to Food Bank and said, I think,
she's struggling.
You might be thinking, because he'd actually been called to look at the garden and give a quote or whatever. The garden's immaculate. The lawn is perfectly manicured. The house is gleaming, glittering in the sun.
The appearance has been kept up.
And he goes inside. There's nothing. There's no furniture. It doesn't even look like anyone lives there because people. And again, it's that pride issue as well. I've heard stories from Salvo, double income families who need food help. It's
well, we're saying it because we see you. We'll keep fighting. We'll keep talking. Thank you very much. Do appreciate it, guys. We'll see you again. Time flies when you're having fun. Quick break. Back with more. I've got this great story about Liz Storer, but sorry, I'm out of time. Here she is with the late debate.